Welcome to Back to the Texts Themselves, a series on phenomenology. Today we examine Chapter 3, Part B, sections 19 to 21 of Heidegger's Being and Time. In the last few videos, we've considered the everydayness of Dasein as it engages in a world that provides a meaning to beings in their readiness to hand. Section B of Chapter 3 addresses an alternative approach in Descartes' ontology of the world. That ontology is founded upon the notion of substance, and for the world, that substance is defined by a particular conception of spatiality called extensio or extension. Examining Descartes' approach will underscore the distinctiveness of the concept of spatiality developed by Heidegger as it pertains to the surrounding world and Dasein. In this video, I address the following questions. 1. What are substance and extension for Descartes? 2. What are the difficulties in Descartes' understanding of substance according to Heidegger? And 3. How is the notion of extension problematic for our understanding of the world? This channel addresses works of philosophy and psychoanalysis. Each video, structured by 3 questions, analyzes a small section as we gradually move through an entire text. To support this work, please consider liking and sharing this video and subscribing to my channel. You can also support this work on Patreon. The link is below in the description. According to Descartes, we're composed of 2 substances, a thinking thing and a bodily or extended thing. Before defining extension, we need to consider the meaning of substance. Descartes deploys the term substance in 2 distinct manners. First, he uses the scholastic definition derived from Aristotle, in which a substance exists in such a way as to depend on no other thing for its existence. Though for Descartes, God is the only being that meets this criterion, he also uses the term to refer to 2 created things, the mind and the body. Relative to other created things, these 2 substances exist in such a way so as to depend on no other created things for their existence. This substantiality of their substance, or the essence of their being, is determined by a principal attribute. The principal attribute of the mind is thought. For the body, it's extension. Thought has a certain priority over extension, as extension cannot be known without thought, whereas thought is not limited by extension. However, for our concern in this section, it's on extension as the substance of bodies. Here, bodies don't just include our own bodies, but the bodies of the world, indeed, the world itself. Extension is the 3-dimensionality of material things in space, its length, breadth, and depth. So it does not come as a complete surprise that one of Descartes' other enduring contributions is his development of what comes to be known as the Cartesian coordinates graph, in which one can plot known factors along 3 axes representing length, breadth, and depth. Extension is the substantiality of bodies because bodies cannot be thought without this attribute. A body is that which resides in space. Hardness and movement are also attributes of bodies, but they don't constitute the substantiality of this substance because they cannot be conceived of without the attribute of extension. Yet, extension remains intelligible without consideration of those attributes. When a property such as extension remains intelligible no matter what other attributes are removed, it then becomes the property that defines a substance, and so the substantiality of that substance. Substantiality is a being that in no way needs other beings in order to be. Though, as mentioned before, created substances fundamentally depend upon the uncreated substance of God. Yet this introduces a difficulty in Descartes' thinking that we'll turn to next. The difficulties associated with Descartes' understanding of substance results from the difficulty in answering another question. What is the meaning of being that is common to the 3 substances of God, extension, and thought? The latter 2, the ens creatum, are produced and sustained by God. And so, despite each being conferred the title of substance, there can be no univocity in the meaning of their substantiality with the substantiality of God. God's substance is infinitely different from the substance of created things. However, this leaves the meaning of being unexplained. Whereas for medieval ontology, being was not explained because it was held to be self-evident. Descartes leaves it unexplained because he considers the notion of substantiality in itself to be inaccessible. It is inaccessible because being in itself does not affect us and so can't be perceived. Heidegger quotes Descartes, "It is moreover easier to know a substance that thinks or an extended substance than substance alone, without regarding whether it thinks or is extended." And so the idea of substantiality in itself is both declared unexplainable in itself and instead is considered only in terms of those necessary attributes of the three different substances mentioned before. The consequence of this is that substantiality becomes understood only in terms of the existent quality of a substance, leading to a hazy mixture of the ontic and ontological. This ambiguity results in a failure to adequately consider the fundamental problem of being, which is the ontological difference, the difference between being in general and particular beings. The ontological difference is, for Heidegger, of central concern, and the task of thinking itself is to grasp this very difference. Heidegger asks of Descartes' ontology, does this ontology of the world see the phenomenon of world at all? And if not, does it at least define interworldly beings to the extent that their worldly character can be made visible? Heidegger's reply here is rather definitive. To both questions, we must answer no. For Descartes, access to being is achieved only through a kind of knowledge equivalent to mathematics. Such knowledge provides a certainty that secures the understanding of the being of beings. Truth, then, is defined as that kind of being that can be apprehended by the intellect with a certainty equivalent to that achieved in mathematics. This is the manner in which the concept of extension functions. Rather than letting things be relevant, rather than allowing interworldly beings disclose their meaning to Dasein, a meaning is instead imposed upon the world, and that meaning reduces beings to their objective presence. The hammer, then, is not primordially understood by its use, but by its manner of extension in space. This mode of knowledge obliterates everything that belongs to sensory perception. Hardness or resistance are not something to be determined by experience, but are modes of extension. Consequently, there is no need to encounter beings to know them. They are already known in advance of such encounters. Now, this represents one of the major transitions from medieval ontology to modern thought. Aristotelian philosophy, which informed medieval ontology, placed the gravity of knowledge in objects in their distinct essences. Consequently, the knower had to be properly disposed to the object to acquire knowledge from it. Much like artisans must conform to the demands of the materials before them. For Descartes, in contrast, objects must be grasped according to preceding conditions in intuition, defined as a clear and attentive mind, and later as clear and distinct perception. By placing the conditions of knowledge in the subject rather than the object, a universal science becomes possible, one modeled on mathematics that grounds all knowledge upon an indubitable foundation. Heidegger finds Descartes' view of the world unacceptable. It presupposes that Dasein relates to the world only in one way, limiting the view of the world to its mode of being as present at hand. Descartes' influence in this regard has been immense. His placing extension as the presupposition of every material being, according to Heidegger, prepared the way for the understanding of the a priori that Kant will later take up. Heidegger then raises the question as to whether we are being unfair to Descartes by imposing categories relevant to us but foreign to his own thought. As such, a philosophical justification of this critique of Cartesian ontology will have to identify the reason for his failure to recognize the problematic of the world. Such a consideration will lead Heidegger to the concept of spatiality, thought in a manner radically different from the Cartesian conception of extension. explicating such a notion of spatiality of the world as necessary for conceiving ontologically the innerworldly beings in the surrounding world, as well as Dasein. I'd like to thank the following for supporting this channel on Patreon. As always, thank you for watching, and until next time, be well.